Welcome to
Welcome to
Tales by
Story
Miss
with Miss
A.
A today.
Sit down,
I bring you a
relax, and
tale of the
enjoy the
heart,
story.
the
Don't
hustle of
forget to
Lagos,
subscribe.
and the high price of a double life. It is a story of a man who gave everything, only to find he was standing on a foundation of lies. Before we begin, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep these lessons alive and ensures you never miss a journey into the truths of human nature. Now, sit back as we journey into the promotion's shadow. They say that when a woman climbs a mountain, she should reach back to pull her husband up. But what happens when she reaches the top and decides she no longer likes the view of the man who helped her get there? Jonathan thought he was walking into a celebration. He didn't know he was walking into the end of his life as he knew it. In the humid, bustling heart of Lagos, Jonathan was a man known for two things: his unwavering smile and his relentless work ethic. He worked as a middle manager for a logistics firm in Apapa, navigating the chaos of containers and clearing agents. His salary was modest, but his heart was full. He lived for one person, his wife, Cynthia. Cynthia was a vision of ambition. She worked in one of the gleaming glass towers of Victoria Island, a rising star in the banking sector. When they first married, they shared roasted corn by the roadside and dreamt of a future where they wouldn't have to count pennies. Jonathan had used his small inheritance to pay for her professional certifications, staying awake with her during late-night study sessions, brewing coffee and whispering words of encouragement. "One day, Jonathan," she would say, her eyes fixed on her textbooks, "I will be the one providing for us. You won't have to struggle in the sun anymore." Jonathan would simply laugh and kiss her forehead. "As long as you are happy, Cynthia, I am a king." But as the years passed, the dynamic began to shift. Cynthia's promotions came fast. First assistant manager, then branch head. With each new title, her wardrobe changed. The simple cotton dresses were replaced by designer suits. The way she spoke changed too. The "we" in her sentences slowly transformed into "I." Jonathan didn't mind the financial gap, he celebrated it. He didn't see the widening chasm in their souls, or the way she began to look at his worn-out shoes with a flicker of embarrassment. To Jonathan, she was still the girl he shared corn with. To Cynthia, Jonathan was becoming a relic of a past she was desperate to outrun. The atmosphere in their Lekki apartment was electric on a Tuesday morning. Cynthia was dressed in a charcoal grey power suit that cost more than Jonathan's monthly take-home pay. She was vibrating with a different kind of energy, a cold, sharp focus. "The board meeting is today, Jonathan," she said, barely looking up from her tablet as she sipped her imported green tea. "If the regional director signs off, I become the youngest senior executive in the bank's history." Jonathan beamed, leaning against the kitchen counter. "I have no doubt, Cynthia, you've worked harder than anyone I know. You deserve this." "I do deserve it," she replied, her voice devoid of warmth. "I've made sacrifices that most people wouldn't understand. I've had to align myself with the right people, Jonathan. In Lagos, it's not just about what you know, it's about who is willing to open the door for you." Jonathan reached out to touch her shoulder, but she stepped away to grab her leather briefcase. "I'll be home late, don't wait up for dinner, there will likely be a cocktail event afterward." Actually, Jonathan thought to himself as the door clicked shut, you won't be celebrating alone. He had a plan. For months he had been doing extra consultancy work on the side, saving every naira. He had finally reached his goal. He was going to buy the diamond pendant she had pointed out in a magazine months ago, a symbol of her brilliance. He wanted to surprise her at the bank, right in front of her colleagues, to show her that no matter how high she flew, he was her biggest fan. He didn't realize that his surprise was about to collide with a secret she had been keeping for a very long time. Jonathan spent his lunch break at a reputable jeweler in Ikja. The air-conditioned store felt like a different world compared to the dusty streets outside. He felt out of place in his simple button-down shirt, but the weight of the cash in his pocket gave him confidence. "I want the best you have for a woman who has reached the top," Jonathan told the jeweler. The man produced a delicate gold chain with a teardrop diamond. It sparkled under the LED lights, clear and unbreakable. "This is for a woman of substance," the jeweler remarked. Jonathan nodded. "That is my wife." As he paid, a small voice of doubt flickered in his mind. He remembered how Cynthia had been coming home later and later. He remembered the scent of a cologne that wasn't his on her jacket a week ago, but he pushed the thoughts away. "She's a banker," he told himself. "She works with men, she's stressed." He left the shop with a small, velvet-lined box tucked securely in his breast pocket, right over his heart. He felt a surge of adrenaline. He would take a bolt to Victoria Island, bypass the usual security hurdles by using his husband of the boss status, and walk into her office just as the sun began to set over the Atlantic. He imagined the look on her face, the shock, the joy, perhaps even a tear of gratitude. He wanted to reclaim his place in her life, to remind her that before the titles and the money, there was a man who loved her for her soul. He checked his watch. It was 4:30 p.m. The board meeting would be over. The senior executive would be in her office, basking in her new glory. The drive from Aikja to Victoria Island was a crawl through the infamous Lagos go-slow. Jonathan sat in the back of the taxi, clutching the velvet box in his pocket. Outside, the city was a blur of street hawkers selling plantain chips and the shimmering reflection of the sun hitting the lagoon. He felt like a king approaching his castle. As the car pulled up to the towering glass edifice of the bank, Jonathan took a deep breath. This was Cynthia's kingdom. The security guards at the front recognized him. He had dropped off her forgotten lunch or laptop often enough in the early days. "Ah, Ogre Jonathan, you come to celebrate, madam?" the lead guard Sunday asked with a wide grin. "We heard the news, senior executive, God is good." "God is indeed good, Sunday," Jonathan replied, slipping the man a small tip. "I want to surprise her. Is she still in her office?" "Yes, sir, she came back from the board meeting an hour ago. She said she shouldn't be disturbed but for you. Go up, sir, go and surprise our madam." Jonathan stepped into the elevator. The brushed steel reflected a man who looked tired but immensely proud. As the numbers climbed, 5, 6, 7, his heart hammered against his ribs. He imagined her sitting behind that mahogany desk, perhaps looking out at the ocean, realizing all her dreams had come true. He wanted to be the first one to tell her that her success was his success too. The 10th floor was different from the rest of the bank. Here, the frantic energy of the tellers and the shouting of the traders faded into a heavy, expensive silence. The carpets were thicker, swallowing the sound of Jonathan's footsteps. The air smelled of expensive sandalwood and filtered oxygen. He bypassed the reception desk. The young lady was busy on a hushed phone call, her back turned. Jonathan knew the way. He walked past the closed doors of other executives until he reached the double oak doors at the end of the hall. The gold nameplate had already been changed. Cynthia A., Senior Executive Vice President. He paused, his hand hovering over the handle. He felt a momentary flash of intimidation. This woman, this senior executive, felt so far removed from the girl who used to help him wash his car on Saturday mornings. But then he felt the weight of the diamond in his pocket. He was her husband. He belonged here. He decided not to knock. He wanted the visual, the sudden burst of his presence, the flowers he'd picked up from the lobby florist, and the ring of truth. He turned the handle slowly, the heavy door pivoting on silent hinges. The office was dim, the afternoon sun filtered through heavy blinds, casting long, golden stripes across the room. "Cynthia," he whispered, his voice catching in his throat. But the room wasn't empty, and the silence wasn't peaceful. It was thick with a sound that made Jonathan's blood turn to ice, the unmistakable sound of a whispered laugh that didn't belong to him, and a shadow that moved against the wall in a way that shattered his reality. Jonathan stepped fully into the room, the bouquet of lilies slipping from his fingers and hitting the plush carpet with a dull thud. His eyes struggled to adjust to the dim light. But his heart had already seen the truth. There behind the massive mahogany desk, the desk he had prayed she would one day earn, was Cynthia. She wasn't alone. Wrapped in the arms of Chief Okoro, the bank's chairman and the man who had supposedly mentored her, Cynthia looked like a woman who had finally found the alignment she had spoken of that morning. The shock was a physical blow. Jonathan felt the air leave his lungs as if he'd been punched. The diamond box in his pocket felt like a glowing coal, burning through his skin. "Jonathan." Cynthia's voice wasn't filled with the guilt he expected. It was sharp, cold, and laced with an immediate defensive irritation. She pushed herself away from the chairman, straightening her charcoal-grey skirt with a flick of her wrists. Chief Okoro didn't even look embarrassed. He simply leaned back in the executive chair, adjusting his gold cufflinks with the nonchalance of a man who owned everything in the room, including the woman standing beside him. "What are you doing here?" Cynthia hissed, her eyes darting to the door as if checking to see if anyone had followed him. "I told you I'd be late. I told you not to come." I came to surprise you," Jonathan managed to choke out. He looked at the flowers on the floor, their white petals already bruising against the dark carpet. "I bought the pendant, Cynthia, the one from the magazine." She let out a short, mocking laugh that cut deeper than any blade. "The pendant, Jonathan. Do you have any idea what kind of world I live in now? Look around you. You think a little piece of gold from Eicher is what I need. The air in the office grew heavy with the smell of expensive cigars and the sharp, metallic scent of betrayal. Jonathan stood frozen, the small velvet box still clutched in his hand like a useless talisman. "Leave us, Chief," Cynthia said, her voice dropping into a low, commanding register Jonathan didn't recognize. Chief Okoro stood up slowly, a smug smile playing on his lips. He patted Cynthia's hand with a possessiveness that made Jonathan's stomach churn. As he walked past Jonathan, he paused, leaning in close. "She's a high-maintenance woman, young man. You should have known your limits." The door clicked shut, leaving Jonathan alone with the woman he had spent 10 years building a life with. "How long?" Jonathan whispered. Cynthia didn't flinch. She walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the glittering lights of the Lekiekoi Link Bridge. "How long has it been since you could afford the life I wanted, Jonathan? That's the real question." "I gave you everything," he argued, his voice cracking. "I paid for your exams, I stayed up with you, I worked double shifts so you wouldn't have to worry about the rent while you climbed this ladder. And I am grateful for the foundation, Jonathan, truly," she said, turning around. Her face was a mask of corporate coldness. "But look at this office. Look at the car waiting for me
Look at the
downstairs.
office. Look at the
You are a
car
middle
waiting for me
manager in a
downstairs.
papa.
You are a
You
middle
deal with
manager in
grease
a
and
papa. You
dust.
deal
I
with
deal
grease
with
and
billions.
dust.
We are no longer speaking the same language." Jonathan felt a wave of nausea. So this promotion, it wasn't because of your hard work, it was because of him. Cynthia's eyes flashed with anger. "Don't you dare diminish my brilliance. I am the best at what I do," Chief just made sure the board didn't overlook me. "In Lagos, talent is a seed but influence is the water. I did what I had to do to ensure I never have to ride a yellow bus again." She stepped closer, the scent of her expensive French perfume filling his senses, a scent he realized now he hadn't bought for her. "Go home, Jonathan," she said softly, almost pityingly. "Take your little gift back to the shop, get your refund, we'll talk in the morning about how to settle the apartment. I think it's best if you move out by the weekend." "Move out," Jonathan gasped. "Cynthia, I am your husband." "On paper, yes," she replied, sitting back down at her desk and opening her laptop as if he were merely a lingering appointment. "But in reality, you're a memory I've outgrown. My life is starting today, and there's no room for a logistics manager in a senior executive's bedroom." Jonathan didn't remember leaving the office. He didn't remember the elevator ride down or the pitying look from Sunday the security guard, who noticed the empty hands and the haunted eyes. He found himself standing on the pavement of Victoria Island, the humid night air clinging to him like a second skin. The luxury cars sped past, their headlights blurring into long streaks of white and red. He felt invisible. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the velvet box. He opened it. The diamond caught the light of a street lamp, sparkling with a cruel, indifferent beauty. It was a piece of gold from Eicher. To him, it represented months of sacrifice. To her, it was trash. He began to walk. He didn't call a taxi. He walked past the tall banks, past the five-star hotels and toward the bridge. His mind was a storm of memories. Cynthia laughing at their wedding, Cynthia crying when she got her first paycheck, Cynthia promising they would make it together. He realized then that the woman he loved hadn't been replaced, she had evolved into a predator. The Lagos hustle had consumed her soul, leaving behind a shell polished in gold and charcoal grey. When Jonathan finally reached their apartment in Lekki, the silence was deafening. He walked through the rooms, seeing his influence everywhere, the bookshelves he'd built, the photos of them on the walls, the small African carvings he'd bought her for their 3rd anniversary. He sat on the edge of the bed and finally let the tears fall. It wasn't just the infidelity, it was the erasure. She hadn't just cheated, she had looked at their entire history and labelled it a struggle she was glad to be rid of. He picked up a framed photo of their wedding day. They looked so young, so full of hope. He remembered his vow, in wealth and in poverty. He had kept his end. She had stayed for the poverty and fled the moment the wealth arrived. As he packed a small suitcase with his basic necessities, he heard a car pull into the driveway. The heavy thud of a Mercedes door, high heels clicking on the pavement. Jonathan realized he couldn't stay to hear more of her justifications. He couldn't stay to see her look at him with that cold, executive pity. He walked out the back door just as she was turning the key in the front. He had nowhere to go but his elder brother's house in the mainland. In the world of a folktale, this was the moment the hero enters the wilderness. And Jonathan was lost in the darkest wilderness Lagos had to offer, a broken heart in a city that never sleeps. The yellow Danfo bus rattled as it crossed the third mainland bridge, leaving the shimmering skyline of Victoria Island behind. Jonathan sat pressed against the rusted metal door, the wind whipping through the window. Every landmark he passed, the Makoko stilt houses, the glowing billboards of a decennal, felt like a milestone marking his descent from the life he thought he owned. He arrived at his elder brother's house in Serula long after midnight. Maliki, a man with greying hair and a heart as sturdy as an Iroko tree, opened the door before Jonathan could even knock. One look at his brother's hollow eyes, and the small, dusty suitcase was enough. "She has finally climbed the mountain and kicked away the ladder, hasn't she?" Maliki asked, stepping aside to let him in. Jonathan collapsed onto a wooden chair, the weight of the day finally crushing him. "She didn't just kick it, Maliki, she burned it. She looked at me like I was a beggar at her gate." Maliki poured a small glass of local gin and set it before his brother. "In our village, they say a bird that forgets the tree that sheltered it during the rain will find no place to perch when the storm returns. Drink. Tomorrow we speak to the fathers." By Thursday the news had travelled. In the world of a Lagos folktale, secrets have wings. Jonathan's kinsmen, 3 elderly men with faces etched by years of survival and tradition, gathered in Malaki's small living room. They wore their wrappers with dignity, their presence bringing a heavy, ancient authority to the cramped space. Jonathan, the eldest Pa Ojo, began, his voice like gravel. "We heard of the shame at the bank. We heard of the chairman who buys what is not for sale.
We heard of the shame at the bank.
I
We
only
heard of the
wanted to
chairman
love
who
her,"
buys what is
Jonathan
not for
whispered,
sale.
his head
I only
bowed.
wanted to love her.
"Love is a covenant, not a contract," Pa Ojo corrected. "She has broken the bread of your marriage and fed it to a stranger for the sake of a title. But remember, the gods of the land do not sleep because a woman has moved to Lekki. There is a protocol for such betrayal." They decided then, a formal visit would be made, not to beg but to return the wine. In their tradition, when a heart is this deeply wronged, the families must meet to witness the severance. Jonathan felt a chill. This wasn't just a breakup, it was a spiritual divorce. While Jonathan sat in the shadows of Serula, Cynthia was basking in the light of her new reality. Her office was now a revolving door of high-profile clients. She had a company driver, a personal assistant, and the constant, heavy attention of Chief Okoro. When her phone buzzed with a message from Maliki requesting a meeting with the elders, she deleted it with a sneer. "They want to bring village drama to my doorstep," she muttered to her reflection in the gilded restroom mirror. She felt invincible. She had moved her things into a penthouse provided by the bank, or rather by the chief. She convinced herself that Jonathan was a weight she had successfully shed to keep from sinking. She didn't realize that in her haste to rise, she had ignored the fine print of the mentorship she had signed onto. The chief's gifts were not free, they were chains forged in gold. Cynthia was hosting a small victory dinner at a high-end restaurant in Ikoyi when they arrived. She was mid-laugh, a glass of expensive champagne in her hand, when the music seemed to dim. At the entrance stood Jonathan, Maliki, and Pa Ojo. They were not dressed in designer labels. They wore traditional attire that stood out like a thumb among the silk-clad socialites. The restaurant manager tried to block them, but Pa Ojo's gaze was so piercing that the man stepped back. The room went silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. Cynthia's face turned from a triumphant glow to a ghostly pale. "Jonathan, what is the meaning of this embarrassment?" she hissed, standing up so fast her chair nearly
Jonathan,
toppled.
what is the meaning of this
"We are not
embarrassment?
here for you, daughter of ambition," Pa Ojo said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "We are here to return the peace you threw away. You told this man he was a memory. Today we make that memory a law." Chief Okoro, who was sitting at the head of the table, stood up with a roar. "Security, get these paupers out of here." But Jonathan stepped forward, his voice steadier than it had been in years. He didn't look at the chief, he looked only at Cynthia. He pulled the velvet box from his pocket, the one containing the diamond she had mocked. "You said this was trash because it came from Ikja," Jonathan said, his voice calm but vibrating with pain. "You said I was a relic of a past you outran." He walked to the center of the table and placed the box down. "I am not here to fight for you, Cynthia. I am here to release myself from the ghost of the woman I thought you were. Keep your promotion, keep your chairman. But know this, a house built on another man's tears never sees the third generation." As they turned to leave, a heavy silence fell over the elite crowd. The victory dinner felt suddenly like a funeral. Cynthia looked at the diamond on the table, the one Jonathan had bled for, and for the first time the cold air conditioning of Ikoyi felt like ice against her soul. After the elders left the restaurant, the music resumed but the rhythm was off. Cynthia sat back down, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The socialites around the table whispered behind their manicured hands. In Lagos, scandal is a currency more traded than the naira, and Cynthia had just become the headline. "Ignore them, darling," Chief Okoro said, though his voice lacked its usual warmth. He didn't like the spotlight when it wasn't focused on his power. "They are just small people trying to pull you down to their level." Cynthia took a long sip of her drink, but it tasted like vinegar. She looked at the velvet box still sitting on the white tablecloth. No one had touched it. It looked like an accusation. For the rest of the night she forced a smile, but her eyes kept darting to the door. She had achieved the status she craved, but the peace Pa Ojo mentioned felt like it had walked out the door with Jonathan. That night, in the sprawling penthouse the chief had provided, the silence was louder than it had ever been in her small apartment with Jonathan. She realized that while Jonathan had built a home around her, the chief had merely built a cage with better views. Monday morning at the bank brought a chilling change in atmosphere. As Cynthia walked through the marble lobby, the usual bows from the junior staff felt hurried and insincere. The senior executive title was on her door, but the respect that should have come with it was missing. By noon, she was summoned to a private meeting, not with the chief but with the Internal Audit Committee. Cynthia, the head auditor, began, a stern woman who had never liked Cynthia's rapid ascent. In light of the public scene last week, the board has requested a full review of the strategic growth accounts you managed under Chief Okoro's supervision. Cynthia's blood ran cold. That's standard procedure for a promotion, isn't it? Not when there are allegations that the growth was fabricated to justify your new salary, the auditor replied coldly. Cynthia realized then that the chief's help wasn't just influence, it was a paper trail of shortcuts. He hadn't promoted her because she was the best. He had promoted her because he needed a loyal face to sign off on his irregularities. She wasn't his queen, she was his shield. While Cynthia scrambled to hide the cracks in her corporate fortress, Jonathan was undergoing a transformation. He didn't spend his days crying. Under the guidance of Maliki and the elders, he returned to the basics. He moved back to a modest room on the mainland and threw himself into his logistics work. But something was different. The pain had sharpened his mind. He began to see the inefficiencies in the Apapa ports that he had ignored while he was distracted by Cynthia's needs. He started a small independent consulting firm, the Foundation Group. He worked from dawn until dusk, fueled by a quiet, steady fire. He wasn't working to prove anything to Cynthia, he was working to reclaim the man he was before he became her footstool. One afternoon, a former client of Cynthia's bank, a man who had witnessed the scene at the restaurant, approached Jonathan. "I like your spirit," the man said. "You have the one thing the people on the island lack, a name that hasn't been soiled by greed." Back at the penthouse, the romance with Chief Okoro had turned into a business transaction. He no longer whispered sweet promises. Instead, he brought folders of documents for her to sign in the middle of the night. "I can't sign these, Chief," Cynthia argued, looking at a transfer that made no sense. "This is money laundering, if the audit finds this." "The audit won't find anything if you do your job," he snapped, his face
The audit
darkening.
won't find anything if you do
"Remember
your
who
job.
put you in this bed, Cynthia. Remember who paid for that suit. You are a senior executive because I said so. If I decide you are a thief, then you are a thief." The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had traded a man who would have died for her for a man who would gladly send her to prison to save himself. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window. The charcoal grey suit no longer looked like armor, it looked like a uniform of a servant. Desperate and feeling the walls closing in, Cynthia did something she thought she'd never do. She drove to the mainland. She parked her luxury SUV in the dusty streets of Serula, drawing stares from children playing football. She found the house where Jonathan was staying. She expected to see him broken, but she found him in the yard, sitting with Maliki and a group of young men, teaching them about supply chain management. He looked healthy. He looked free. "Jonathan," she called out, her voice trembling. The group went silent. Jonathan stood up slowly. He didn't look at her with anger or even with the love that used to burn in his eyes. He looked at her with a profound, distant pity. "The audit is happening, Jonathan," she whispered, ignoring the others. "They're going to pin it all on me, the chief. He's not who I thought he was." Jonathan crossed his arms. "He is exactly who he is, Cynthia. You were just too blinded by the gold on his fingers to see the dirt under his nails. What do you want from me? Help me, she pleaded. Use your connections in logistics. Help me move some of the records. Jonathan shook his head. I am a builder of foundations now, Cynthia. I don't help people hide their shadows. Cynthia stood in the dust of Cerula, the silence of Jonathan's refusal ringing in her ears. She had come expecting a husband she could manipulate with tears, but she found a man who had become an oak tree. As she drove back to the island, the city lights felt like cold, accusing eyes. The next morning the bank was swarmed. It wasn't just the internal auditors anymore. The Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, had arrived. The news moved through the office like a wildfire. Chief Okoro had fled to London on a private jet at dawn, leaving a trail of empty accounts and forged signatures. Cynthia sat at her mahogany desk, the same one where she had once felt like a queen. 2 officers stood at her door. Cynthia A., one said, his voice devoid of emotion. You are the primary signatory on these diverted funds. You'll need to come with us. As they led her through the lobby in handcuffs, the same staff who had bowed to her now turned their heads in shame. She looked for a friendly face, but she had traded friends for associates, and associates are the first to vanish when the storm breaks. The weeks that followed were a blur of cold holding cells and relentless questioning. Cynthia's lawyers, hired with what was left of her savings, told her the truth she didn't want to hear. The chief made you the fall guy. Every document carries your name, not his. In the solitude of her cell, the memories she had suppressed began to flood back. She saw Jonathan's face, not the face of the man she mocked, but the face of the man who had stayed up until 2 a.m. helping her memorize banking regulations. She realized that the ladder she thought she climbed was actually a trap, and she had walked into it willingly because she valued the view more than the foundation. She sent a letter to Jonathan, begging for a visit. She didn't want money, she wanted to see someone who knew her before she became a monster of ambition. But the letter was returned unopened. The memory Pa Ojo spoke of had truly become a law. Jonathan had moved on. While Cynthia's name was dragged through the mud of the daily papers, Jonathan's name began to shine in the light of integrity. His firm, the Foundation Group, was awarded a major government contract to overhaul the logistics of the Apapa port. He didn't move back to Lekki. He stayed on the mainland, building a business that treated its workers with dignity. He became a mentor to young men, teaching them that a man's worth is not measured by the height of his wife's heels or the zeros in her bank account, but by the strength of the character he brings to the table. One evening, Pa Ojo visited him. They sat on the veranda, the sound of Lagos life humming around them. You have done well, my son, the elder said. You survived the fire. Many men would have let that woman's betrayal turn them into a bitter ghost, but you used the heat to forge a better sword. Cynthia was eventually sentenced to 3 years in prison, with most of her assets seized. On the day she was transporting to the correctional facility, she caught a glimpse of a billboard near the prison gates. It was an advertisement for a new shipping hub, the Foundation Group. At the bottom was a small quote, built on truth. She wept then, not for her lost luxury, but for the realization that she could have been the co-owner of that truth. She had traded a kingdom for a costume. Meanwhile, Jonathan stood at the edge of the Lagos lagoon, watching the ships come in. He pulled a small, velvet-lined box from his pocket. He hadn't returned the diamond to the shop. He looked at it one last time, the symbol of a love that was pure but misplaced. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it into the deep, dark water. It was the last piece of the old life he held onto. Every story in our land carries a seed for the future. The story of Jonathan and Cynthia became a modern folktale told in the markets of Oshodi and the boardrooms of Ikoyi alike. It reminds us that success is like a shadow. It is longest when the sun is setting, but it has no substance of its own. To build a life on the betrayal of the one who watered your seeds is to ensure that your harvest will be ashes. Jonathan eventually found a partner who valued the soil as much as the fruit. And Cynthia, she learned that the hardest prison is not the one with bars, but the one you build for yourself when you trade your loyalty for a title. And so, as Miss A would say, let us remember, never let the gold you seek blind you to the diamond you already hold in your hand. Thank you for journeying with me through the promotion's shadow. If this story touched your heart or taught you a lesson about loyalty, please comment below with the word foundation. Don't forget to subscribe to Story with Miss A for more tales of truth and triumph. Until next time, keep your heart pure and your eyes open.